Are you looking to get ready, be prepared, and transform your financial future? Then you've come to the right place. This is the Get Ready Money Podcast with Tony Stewart, where Tony has insightful conversations with financial experts who are changing the way we think about money. Catch up on the latest financial trends and hear practical advice from Tony and his expert guests so you can build healthy habits that work. Be empowered with tips for implementing small changes that can have a big impact on your financial future. So sit back and get ready to hear from today's guest.
Welcome to the Get Ready Money Podcast, changing the way we think about money. I'm pleased to be joined today by Bernadette Joy. Bernadette is an author, speaker, and coach. Bernadette, great to have you back. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you so much for having me. I had such a great time last time. We're back again.
Yeah, excited to talk a little bit about you and your book. So, just to refresh everybody, tell us a little bit again about your origin story.
Sure. So I am Bernadette Joy. I'm the eighth of my father's 9 kids. Born and raised in Queens, New York. Now live in Charlotte, North Carolina. And now, almost 10 years ago, found myself in $300,000 of debt, including all of the things that the normal American could probably relate to: student loans and credit cards and car payments and all that. And found myself going through my own personal finance journey and became debt-free, and now am on the verge of practicing early retirement. My birthday is in a couple of weeks. My 40th birthday is in a couple of weeks. And so I'm going to be trying on early retirement for size. And throughout this whole journey, I've had the opportunity to coach and meet a lot of people from all across the country, and then just became an author, first-time author of Crush Your Money Goals, which is everything that I wish I knew crammed into one book.
That's awesome. Well, early retirement is going to be interesting. Now, are you fully retiring, or are you kind of cruising into it part-time, or?
Yeah, great question. I right now it looks like it'll be part-time. As in I'm kind of part-time retired now. I work about 20 hours a week currently, Monday through Wednesdays as my normal work days. But I had just mentioned to you right before we recorded this podcast that I just came back from this 3-day like unplugged, had to sit literally in the middle of the forest by myself and contemplate what I want this next chapter to look like. And I realized that retirement for me just really means prioritizing my peace, meaning not going to take any clients that I don't feel like are a good fit. I'm not going to take on any engagements or go to certain places where I feel like that's not my audience, and really prioritizing my health over money, which, if I'm being completely transparent, was not my priority for the last couple of years. And I think that's like this next chapter for me where, because I have built this financial security for myself, which I also had to kind of realize. I was like, I am secure. Like, I am okay. After, for decades feeling like I didn't have enough money, I didn't have enough resources to actually sit here and be saying, you know what, we have enough. And so let's focus on the things that really matter, which are health and relationships. And I think that's what I'm going to be focused on in retirement, or at least
Well,
trying.
that is awesome, and I think that more people are starting to talk about health because we talk about health span and wealth span. My friend Stephen Gwinnett, I don't know if you know Stephen, the girl named Stephen, who talks a lot about this, is because we're living a long time, but we're not healthy that
Mm-hmm.
full time. And so, when a lot of us work till the traditional retirement age is 65 plus, we're not able to enjoy things. So it's pretty cool that you're already starting to think about that so you can enjoy a lot of the things while you're able to.
Yeah, I went on this trip a couple of years ago in South Korea. I'm a really big Korean culture fan, so K-pop and K-drama, and it was this 8-day tour to travel to these different Korean drama spots. And it just really hit me during that trip that my husband and I were among the youngest people on that tour. And if you kind of think about it, the people, most of them were retirees. And so it was when they had the time, they had the resources to be able to like step away from their lives for 8 days. And several of them said to me and my husband, they're like, wow, it's so great that you're doing this now at your age, because some parts of the trip were really challenging physically, as in we had to like climb up a mountain, or we had to walk for miles on certain days, or we didn't maybe get the best sleep certain nights. And so it really hit me where, if I have this opportunity to do this earlier, then why not try it? And people always ask me, well, what happens if you run out of money? Or what happens if you get bored? Or, one of 100 things that could go wrong in early retirement. And I've basically said to people, well, I guess I'll just figure it out when I get there. It's, I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry too much about something that I can't control down the line, but I do know that at least for now, my focus for myself and a lot of the messaging that I'm giving to folks is, really wealth. And I know you and I are very aligned on this. Wealth is really quite meaningless if you're not healthy.
I love that. Wealth is meaningless if you're not healthy. And I think that's what a lot of people are starting to think about. Um, is that like we've been talking about, is that you want to go into retirement and be able to enjoy it. Otherwise, it's just a pile of money. And you said something earlier that I want to walk back to because I think it's all so important, is that retirement means prioritizing your peace, and that you are doing something that I did a few years ago, is making that decision to work with people that we want to work with. And I think that is such a huge transition for business owners, is to think about, as I heard this from a retirement planning firm I did a lot of consulting with, is the term firing your clients. And
Mm-hmm.
essentially it was, is finding new advisors for clients that weren't a good fit for, the
That's
firm's
right.
values and everything else. I think that's so important.
Yes, I'm actively in that process right now. I've had to let go of some clients recently, and not because I think they were bad or that we were bad, or not even necessarily that we were a bad fit, but I recognize that I'm just in this different chapter in my life, and I wanted to spend more of my time and resources on certain types of clients that would get the most benefit from what I do. So, kind of a classic example, a lot of people don't know that I am a business coach and an accredited investor. And I don't publicize that very often. So I have a core group of clients who kind of fit into my investment thesis of wanting to build great businesses, but also want to pursue financial freedom. And what I figured out was that there's a lot of business coaches for people who are like more than happy to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. And in my opinion, I actually don't think it's that hard to make a lot of money if you're willing to work, you know, that many hours a week. And so for me, the coaching clients that work best are the people who actually have a lot of diverse interests outside of business and outside of work, and who want to spend more time with their families. And so they're forced to be more efficient in their businesses and come up with better processes and operations. And we're not wasting a lot of time on like trying to create a business that revolves around them, because a business that revolves around a particular person is obviously a lot riskier than a business that has a lot of good processes in place, regardless if that person still exists. So it's been really fun for me to come to that aha moment myself of what type of clients I want to serve in the business space, but then also in the personal finance space. Um, you and I think are very much aligned on that respect of, there's more to this than just money. And the H in crush, it stands for heal your money wounds. And I realize that the best clients that I have in the personal finance space are the ones who are willing to be a little bit more vulnerable about what they're afraid of and what has held them back in the past, versus, sometimes I get really high performing clients who are like, nothing bothers me, nothing can stop me, like I can shove my way through any any situation. But what I found is that they're a lot of times they're lying to themselves about what is really kind of deeply rooted and why they can't seem to overcome their money goals. And so the ones that are willing to be a lot more honest about where they are ones that I think I can work really well with. And it took me a while to figure out what those archetypes look like.
That's awesome. And I know for me, it was also easier, like with you, is to work with clients that I was aligned with. And, it just changes the relationship because you're looking forward to seeing that client and to working on their stuff and to having those conversations. So real quick, because I want to make sure we do talk
Yeah.
about your book, is, how can people start to heal their money wounds? How can they, once they've confronted them, how do they do that?
Yeah, well, of course, I'm always a big proponent of actual licensed therapy. A lot of people conflate money coaching with therapy, and they are not the same. Even though I have a psychology degree, I do not bill myself as a therapist. So I always tell people investing in a regular therapist, even if it's just quarterly and not every week or every, people are like, I can't make that kind of commitment. Quarterly therapy can go a long way for a lot of people. I actually require a lot of my clients to have a therapist when they're also coaching with me. So that's number one. Number two is in the book, I talk about screenless Sundays, which is essentially what I did this past weekend, but except for like over the course of 3 days. And specifically, I didn't really find much of this in my research when I was doing this book of anything that actually helped us get over the Joneses. We've all heard like, oh, keeping up with the Joneses, like just don't do that. But there was never really any practical step on actually like how do I stop comparing myself to the other people around me, which is a huge part of people's money wounds. I found that many people, especially Gen Xers, always felt like they're behind. And I'm like, behind who? And they could never really give me a good answer as to who they were comparing themselves to. And we figure out most of it is the people they see on their social media feeds who we don't really know what's going on with them. So, one of the practical tips I give in the book, a habit that I ask people to incorporate into their money routines is to do screenless Sundays, which is kind of rooted in like, the original idea of like Sabbath or, other kind of religious things where you just like take the day to meditate and focus on, kind of the inner work, journal, basically no screens, like no computer, no cell phone, no nothing. I actually lock my phone in my car every Sunday and I don't look at it all day. It turns out, y'all, that you have a lot of free time when you're not staring at a screen every day. And so I've gotten a lot of clients already who've told me that one habit has helped them work on healing some of their money wounds because they actually have the time and space to process what they've been thinking.
That's awesome. And I think that does do a little bit of a reset because, you think about it, you have your phone out when you go out to eat, you have your phone out when you're at the dinner table, I mean, it's just everywhere. And
Mhm.
it's a distraction. It keeps you from connecting with other things. And like you said, is noticing other things. Like if you go for a walk without looking at your phone, it's very different, uh, with the experience. And so that's wonderful advice. So now let's talk about your new book. What inspired you to write Crush Your Money Goals?
So my new book.
There you go.
I would love to tell you that I had some like big stroke of inspiration. It actually was not the case. I have been teaching, I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years. I've been teaching personal finance since 2018. And I'm relatively kind of unknown in the like kind of social media world. And I always found myself in this weird space where people like thought I was an influencer, but I'm like, but I don't take any brand deals. I'm just a financial educator. I coach people on finances, so it's always been my model. And I um got acquainted with a organization called FinCon. They have a, finance conference every year for personal finance creators. And I went to my first one in 2019. And I saw Ramit Sethi speaking on stage, and that was the first time I've ever really heard about him. And I was just like, whatever he's doing, like I want to try that. And so I, came up with my framework, based it on my own lived experience, and then. What was a kind of a full circle moment was in 2022, I was the main stage speaker at the same conference. So I was like, oh, I actually did what I said I was going to do. And it turns out that the publishers of what is now my book, Simon and Schuster, saw my talk at FinCon and they approached me about writing this book specifically around money habits. What I think is interesting and I think is important for people to know is that originally the concept came to me as, oh, we want you to write 100 habits. I was like, nope. I was like, oh, who wants to read 100 habits? That is just incredibly overwhelming. And I said, well, I have this framework. It's Crush Your Money Goals. It is time tested. I have used it with hundreds of people at this point, and it's gone through many iterations. And I think it would be a great basis for what this book is. And we can put, 5 habits that are very practical and doable for the average person under each of these letters. And that's how the book came to be.
That's awesome. So, what would you tell other people? Because there's a lot of people I know in the personal finance space who are like, should I write a book? Shouldn't I write a book? What was the process like? I mean, how did you know that you were actually ready to write a book?
I didn't. So I tend to do a lot of things scared. I actually said no to initially. I said no to several kind of book things in the past because I genuinely did not think anyone would buy a book from me because truthfully, I just did not see a lot of authors like that had a similar background to me. Um, but I will say that I have severely underestimated the value that it has brought to my life in writing this book. Um, if I'm being, again, totally transparent, is generally speaking, I've told people, unless you're really doing this because you have like a message on your heart that you want to get out, this is like not a money making project. Most books, I read somewhere that, the average author sells 200 books in their lifetime. And so, if you're doing the book to think that you're going to make a ton of money off of this, that is just not the case. And especially in traditional publishing, unless you're like, Simon Sinek or like Mel Robbins or someone like that, the book itself is not a huge money generator. But what I did find that the book has been really helpful for me personally is that it really forced my hand to be very clear about what I stand for. Because books, like once it's printed, you can't really change it, right? Versus when, if I write an Instagram post or if I write a blog post somewhere, I could delete it if I feel like, oh, it doesn't really, like it doesn't
Yeah.
resonate anymore. But with the book, like the book, once it's out there, right? So it really forced my hand to be very crystal clear about what I truly believe in that people need help with when it comes to personal finance. And it also forced me to be very concise.
Yeah. And that's something I know for me with writing my books is that, is you do have to eh, not take a stand, but understand who you are and how you want to be interpreted. uh, because it is out there and it's always going to be something that people refer to. And, and like you said, is you have to be ready to write a book. That's somebody else, somebody who was a mentor to me when I was writing, somebody who'd written his own books. He's like, you'll know when it's time, to write a book. And as you point out, his passion has a lot to do with it, especially in the nonfiction space, is
Mm-hmm.
because you have to be passionate because you're not doing it for the money. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
you do touch lives. So how do people get started when they're overwhelmed by the money world?
Ah, yes. So conveniently, and why I formulated Crush was that I realized that there's a lot of advice out there in personal finance, but most people are trying to do too much at the same time. For example, I always get the client who's like, "Oh, I need to pay off my debt, and I also need to save money, and I need to invest in my retirement, and I need to send my kids to college, and I need to buy a house, and I need to have like three dogs," right? Like, and they're trying to like spread their money way too thin. Or they're trying to do all the steps, but it's out of order. So classic example is, I have a lot of people who are trying to invest before they pay down their credit card debt. And so I'm very, very straightforward with people to say, if you have credit card debt, you should not be investing right now. So the best way that I can say to answer your question of like, well, how do people get started if they're feeling overwhelmed is to do the C in Crush, which is to curate your accounts. And simply that means like get your stuff in order, bro or sis. Like you're trying to make decisions and you don't even know where all your stuff is, right? So it's kind of like, the analogy I have this going on in my life right now where I'm getting ready to potentially move in preparation for my early retirement. And it's like, oh, I'm trying to I'm trying to like look at houses or look at, like different properties. It would be kind of silly for me to do that if I didn't know how much money I had to spend, right? So I want people to look and say, well, if I'm trying to make any financial choices, I need to know how much money I have to spend, which is,
Mhm.
looking at your accounts and curating all of your assets, all of your liabilities, all of your property, and all of your investments. So I tell people to just start there, and at least we can start from a very true set of facts versus what we think in our heads.
Yeah, I think that's so important. You have to understand what your resources are. And to go back what you said about the overwhelmed is it is so easy because there's so many messages of things that we're expected to use. Don't run up your credit card bills. Save all this money, invest. Maybe you should get Bitcoin. And people are like, what? And then they end up making really poor financial decisions is because like they don't even know what their goals are. And like you're talking about is your resources is, I've seen that sometimes, where people will buy like some type of insurance, but yet they already have it through their employer. But it's because
That's a
they
great example.
don't, yeah, they don't do it. And I know I worked with some clients as I consult people who watch and listen to the podcast know this. I was a consultant to financial planners. And sometimes, their clients would come in and they'd have 5 or 6 life insurance policies.
That's
And I'd
right.
be like, you don't need all those policies.
That's
You
exactly
have,
right. That's
and
exactly right.
yeah, so it's like that's such a huge pattern. So I'm so glad that that's where your book starts because I think that's where you have to start. So we're talking about your financial independence, but why do we all deserve our own financial independence?
Whew. Well, I I think I've been very, very blessed with the fact that I had such a diverse group of people come through Crush Your Money Goals. So I've had people who are like $1 million in debt to being multimillionaires. Like, so the scale of kind of different scenarios I've seen has been quite broad. And I genuinely realize that a lot of personal finance, well, yes, I absolutely believe in personal accountability and that we are, the creators of our own kind of destinies here, is that a lot of personal finance really did overlook some of the practical challenges that people have day to day. And so for me, as an example, you know, a lot of people assume, oh, well, you don't have kids because, and so therefore it must be easier for you to reach financial independence earlier. That's a common comment that I get from folks. Oh, I have kids, so like you don't understand. What a lot of people don't know, and I talk about it in the book, is that I have a kind of chronic condition that without health insurance would cost me $2,000 to $3,000 per month. And so it was imperative for me, especially if you live in the US. I hate to say it, but I don't think there's any way around having true freedom unless you are financially, not just literate, but financially independent, meaning that you don't necessarily have to rely on some of these systems that, truthfully, in my opinion, have been designed to keep us poor, to keep us divided, to keep us unhealthy, because it's easier to influence someone who doesn't have a lot of choice. So I really, really like more so than ever, I thought the timing of this book could not be better in 2025 to say there's a lot of people who are feeling very disenfranchised, who are feeling very not in control of their futures. Me specifically with healthcare, like I have a real gripe right now with healthcare because I am constantly battling them to just get basic things done. Um, and so if not for the fact that I have the resources to pay for it out of pocket, I don't know that I could actually pursue basic health. So I'm really, really grateful for those of people who are investing in the book and investing in financial independence because it's really, it's really us saying, you know what? There's only so many things I can control externally. Real financial independence means that I don't have to rely on these systems for my own well-being, financially and holistically.
That's awesome. And I think, what you're saying too is to highlight the financial literacy is really the foundation,
Hmm.
is that to start to understand that you do have those choices, but the choices come with education,
Hmm.
is that, a lot of the financial education comes from big banks and credit card companies who have a biased interest. And that's always something I recommend to people is to understand the bias of the people who are giving the financial advice, and including the influencers that you talked about earlier, that a lot of them are sponsored by big banks. And while that's not necessarily bad, and I have a lot of friends who do have those brand deals, is it is something that when they're talking on behalf of a brand, they are talking on behalf of a brand.
That's
Um,
right. And honestly, I've struggled with that personally because I have only taken one brand deal in the entire time that I've been doing this, and it was specifically for landlord insurance, which was something I wish I had when I was a landlord because
mhm.
I had a tenant who like destroyed one of my properties at one
Oh,
point.
geez.
And but I actually made it a very personal mantra. I have gotten so many pitches from big banks and credit cards to pitch their services and life insurance and like all these types of, and I just have never taken any of those deals because I just wasn't aligned to it. Two, I used to work in financial services, and so I kind of saw the underbelly of what some of those things were. But three, it really gave me the freedom to actually speak very authentically, and not have to worry about my income or my livelihood being dependent on, m- angering one of my sponsors, right? And so I agree with you. I don't know it's necessarily a bad thing, if other people are taking those sponsorships, but I will say, and this is actually something I'm working on in 2025, is I do want to create more content around like media literacy and helping people understand when they see a sponsored post from a financial influencer, what does that really mean? And like what questions should you be asking yourself before you buy into one of these products that they're advertising?
Yeah, and I think that's so important is to consider the bias. And I'm glad that you're considering doing that project because I think that is one of the huge problems, in our world. Is I was just recording a different podcast episode with a friend of mine, and we were talking about the concept of being your own banker, and she asked the question of like, well, why is this so popular? And I go, well, it's always follow the money. Is insurance agents make a huge commission, is that's why everybody's pushing it, and they're immensely profitable to the insurance companies. So it's like, yeah, you have to always follow the money and
Mhm.
understanding who's benefiting. And so I'm so glad that that's something that you're considering because I think we do need the independent voices. And for us as financial literacy creators is, that's something I don't answer to anybody, so I can speak my mind. And a lot of things I've said, I know are unpopular in the insurance industry and some of the stances that I've taken, but I think it makes us, like you said, authentic and
Mm-hmm.
somebody people can identify with. And I think that's so important. Um, and as a creator, I think that's something to consider when you're
Mm-hmm.
approached for a brand deal or some of these things is that, if you sell a little bit of your soul, um, it's, you'll feel it. Uh,
Absolutely, absolutely. And like not quite the same, but something that's come up for me recently was that I so I'm very vocal about student loans and kind of the struggle I had with student loans. And my alma mater for my MBA program, I had reached out to them a couple of weeks ago to say, hey, I wrote this book and I really love to share it with my fellow alumni if there's an event or something that I can do that with. And they basically came back and said to me like, oh, well, we've seen your content and how you basically that you were like poo-pooing on the MBA program. And I was just like, wow, that's interesting. Like, that's interesting that one, you saw my content and there was no response from y'all. But also, I said to them, I'm like, it can be true that I enjoyed the program, but I did not enjoy how it was financed and I did not enjoy how it was communicated to me. Right. And so I think that's where, again, this media literacy can come in to say, I don't expect everyone to make the same choices as me, but I think it should be a lot clearer on what you're signing up for. Like, I say in multiple podcasts, like had I really truly understood what I was signing up for when I signed up for student loans, I would have probably approached it differently. And it was, like that whole process tends to be very nebulous. And so that goes with a lot of other financial products, whether it is loans or credit cards or insurance products, is that, what we're seeing from influencers is like, oh, this is a great deal and you should just do it because you can earn 4.5% or you can do this or you can get points. But they don't tell you on the other side, like, well, here are the consequences if you don't use the product properly or you don't understand what you signed up for. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done in that. And I think I'm excited and ready to like take on some of that project myself because I'm not sponsored. So I have the freedom to do that.
Well, that's awesome. And I think it gets back to financial literacy is asking the questions is because that's so something I've seen so many times. Somebody's in a financial product and then it's really hard for them to get out sometimes, surrender charges, or
I've
whatever reason.
yeah, I've done that with many of my clients who bought into a life insurance policy. They had no idea what they were getting into, and then they were paying all these crazy fees, right? So I'm so grateful that given your background in the industry in the industry, that you're sharing some of those things because I think, and again, I don't think there's, I don't, I think the vast majority of people in the personal finance space are not ill-intentioned, but I do think they're often ill-informed. And I actually coach other personal finance creators, and sometimes I have to sit down with them and say, like, do you really understand what you're pushing to your client, like to your audience before you do that? Um, and so I'm also really fascinated by the fact that I've been approached several times by many other products or services, and they didn't even offer for me to have a trial period or to test out the product. And so whenever I've gotten approached, I'm like, well, okay, let me take a look at it and let me test it out for myself. They're always like, wow, no one's ever done that before. And I'm like, that is so bizarre to me. That is so odd to me, which is why I have not really even taken any sponsorships, because once I've tested a lot of these products, they did not say they did not do what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, and I've been more involved with fintechs, and yeah, that's something with some of the financial technology companies. It's like, you guys aren't solving the problem you think you're solving.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
or you're not giving people the right thing. And we don't need to talk about certain companies that are encouraging people to gamble rather than invest, but you know,
Or they're creating a problem and then selling you a solution, which that to me is like a whole other conversation we could have.
yeah. 100%, 100%. So, before we start to wrap up, one thing that I did want to talk to you is just to jump back to money wounds, because I think this is something that hopefully people would want to know is why is it important to actually address and heal our money wounds?
I will use what we just talked about as an example. Is often healing and addressing these money wounds helps us prevent us from making future bad choices or being vulnerable to some of these types of products or services that are not going to serve us. So, I think the life insurance conversation is a good example of this. I had three different clients, all of whom bought into whole life insurance policies that they genuinely could not afford. And at first I was just like, I don't even understand how this, like, if they were a true financial advisor, they'd have looked at your finances and see that you cannot afford this. And when I asked them why did they sign up for this, one of them was a single woman who was told, like, oh, this will be, essentially she was told that this will make you more attractive as, like, to potential partner, because now you're going to have this asset and you're going to have this whatever. And
Wow.
I was telling her, like, you understand, like, like this life insurance policy is not an investment. You could have done this, you could have put into your 401k or something instead. But also, like, who are you insuring? You have no kids, you have no like, who would be the beneficiary of this life insurance? And she was like, they never told me that, right? So there was that. There was one client who signed this life insurance policy because she got diagnosed with cancer several years before that, and she was genuinely afraid that her family would, not be able to survive without her, because she was a primary breadwinner in the family. But she didn't realize that she had enough assets to essentially make sure everything that she was worried about that would happen to her family, she had enough assets to cover that even without the life insurance. And then the third one was an immigrant family who, and this makes me really crazy, particularly I've noticed this a lot in, like, the Latino kind of population, is that they're buying these life insurance policies really under the impression that, like, that it's like necessary that you have to do that. And so I was seeing life insurance policies for, like, babies that I'm just like, I genuinely don't understand, like, why, like, a newborn baby needs a life insurance policy right now when you have X amount of money in credit card debt. Like, that doesn't seem like the right priority. So I say that all in that's such a prime example for me where these past money wounds, like someone afraid that they're going to get cancer again, someone afraid that they're going to be single the rest of their life, someone afraid that they're going to be a bad parent because their parents were not great to them. Those all led them to make a very significant financial decision that was not in their favor. So I really am so glad that you asked that question, as a long-winded answer to say, in addressing these money wounds, you'll understand what you're really afraid of, and we can find the best solutions to solve those issues versus the one that's just being sold to you.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. And just for people watching and listening, I actually have an upcoming episode where we flipped the script, and a friend of mine came on and was the host and asked me about the be your own banker concept, which is a very popular concept on social media about whole life insurance because you cannot be your own banker, and whole life insurance is not a Swiss Army knife of the financial services world. So I'm really glad you bring that up. And I think your points about the money wounds, it's so important to understand it because those things can drive us to make, not optimal financial decisions because, if we saw our parents argue about money, we're not going to want to have money conversations with our spouse because we're like, oh boy, if we talk about money, it's going to lead to an argument. And,
Hmm.
and you need to communicate with your partner about
Hmm.
money. It's important. So that's awesome. And I know you cover that in your book. So,
I
we'll
do.
plug your book. Um, a couple more questions is what is your number one go-to money resource for yourself, whether it's a podcast, book, newsletter, app, or website? What do you turn to?
Oh, so every day, I'm not sponsored. Um, Monarch Money is a tool that I use to track all of my net worth and track kind of where I am with my finances. And I uh, was forced to switch over from Mint when Mint went away. And I was like so devastated when Mint went away. And then when I found Monarch, I was like, oh, this is even better. And so I use that for all of my clients. Um, and what I love about it too is I've been able to kind of have more fun with it where I encourage all of my clients, and I talk about this in the book, where instead of just calling things like, oh, checking account, savings account, you know, investment account, I encourage clients to name these accounts what their purpose is and how that aligns with their values. So instead of saying checking account, it says, like mine right now literally says, you are fine. As in, like, you're not in survival mode anymore. Like, stop stressing about this, right? And my investment account says, uh, um, uh, babe, babe in Bali, which is like me, like manifesting for myself of just like, I'm going to be healthy and I'm going to be like in all these different places. And so I love Monarch Money because it's very like customizable where you can put in emojis and you can make it like really fun.
That's cool. And I think that's important is because, if you're making it a little more fun, it's something that you want to engage with. And I think so much of the money world, people are like, oh man, this stuff is really just not fun. It's like, I don't want to deal with it. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that I think if you change that narrative, that makes a huge difference.
Yes.
So what is your number one tip on changing the way we think about money?
Number one tip. I always have different tips, like depending on the day. But
Okay.
today, today, what is coming up for me is, the Pareto principle. The 80/20 rule, as some people like to call it. I like to call it the rule of like world peas because the guy Pareto, the way he figured this out, this is really where my nerdy research came in, was the way that Pareto came up with the 80/20 rule was that he was looking at his pea garden and he noticed that 20% of the pea plants were producing 80% of the harvest. And so you extrapolate that to a lot of different concepts in money. And why call this one out in particular is I see a lot of people being stalled on having perfect choices and perfect decisions and saying I need to be 100% right before I move on, which I say, like, you can interpret this rule to say, as long as you're doing good, like 80% of the time, you're allowed to be a human 20% of the time and mess things up. I promise you, you still won't, it won't break you. Like I have made so many money mistakes in the past, but I would say now the ratio is about like 20% of the things I've done are the ones that went awry. Right? So like as long as you have like, as a very, type A, like I had to be the top of my class type of person, like I was always like I need to strive for 100%. And that was very hard for me to unravel because it also meant that I was stalled on a lot of choices that didn't need 100% accuracy. So I tell people now, like, make 80% your target. If you can get to 80% sure that something is right, or you can get to 80% of your budget being right and 20% of it went awry this month, then you're still doing great.
That's awesome. And I think that's something, that we need to keep in mind, no matter whether it's for money or anything else, is, you don't have to be perfect.
Hmm.
You just have to, try to do your best and everything. And I just, all of a sudden, I went back to, what you were talking about with dating and you know, just imagining somebody saying, oh, well, do you have a whole life insurance policy? Yeah. Not a great conversation starter, but I guess, people have different things. So
Yeah.
that could be interesting. So Bernadette, where can people learn more about you? What social media channels are you on? And where can they pick up a copy of Crush Your Money Goals?
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It helped me kind of jog some of the things that I've been thinking about as well. You can find me at crushyourmoneygoals.com. It's the same as the book title. And on social media, I am primarily on LinkedIn at Bernadette Joy, spelled with the word debt. At Instagram, same handle, Bernadette Joy, spelled with the word debt. And we have ongoing YouTube every Monday and sometimes Thursdays. We post on our YouTube channel conversations around other authors as well as quick money tips. And so we are really excited because we just crossed over. I think we're about to cross over like maybe 6,000 people on our YouTube channel, and that's
Ah.
been a new platform for me to get excited about.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on that. And for everybody watching and listening, as always, there will be links to Bernadette's social media handles, accounts, website, and links to purchase her book in the show notes. Crush Your Money Goals. So, Bernadette, thanks again for joining us again on the Get Ready Money podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and thank you everyone as always for tuning into this episode of the Get Ready Money podcast. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money, please be sure to subscribe and to tell a friend. Until next time, let's change the way we think about money.